What a nice voice. All right.
Okay. Ready?
Go ahead.
All right. Hello, I'm Mike Murgis of Catalent Pharma Solutions, and I am thankful for the opportunity to talk to you today about accelerating pharmaceutical development through strategic analytical partnerships. My background is foundational as to why I'm here today and why I'm so passionate about the topic. As this slide indicates, I'm getting a little bit older, and I've become more prone to thinking about my experiences and how I can impact the future. I started at the research bench at Johns Hopkins and then moved on to the National Cancer Institute, becoming more collaborative along the way. I acquired a taste for operations at the Institute of Human Virology. That led me to Lonza Biologics and now Catalent. I stepped away from operations a few months ago with the opportunity to build strategic relationships between two or more organizations with shared visions and goals. The biologics analytical field has evolved greatly over the past 30 years, as witnessed among us this week at the WCBP conference. And now I'd like to share a new concept that I think will benefit all of us. Today I'm going to review the underlying nature of market segment growth from biopharma to biologics contract research organization markets. Then I'm going to introduce a model that outlines the principles, drivers, and options for you to create strategic outsourcing partnerships. And it's no longer just a model, it's a work in progress. And I will present a case study demonstrating the model's effectiveness. The biopharma market globally is growing annually at more than 15%. And it's now become the largest and consistently fastest growing market of the healthcare industry, with annual sales of over $200 billion. Along with that growth, contract manufacturing organizations are expanding capacity by once again building new facilities that are extremely cost efficient to the biopharma market. And this reflects this biopharma demand as many of them continue to outsource or even outsource more. And I'll get to some of those details momentarily. Meanwhile, pharma is consolidating through acquisitions and mergers and also through forming strategic alliances. This is a minor threat to many CMOs due to their shrinking client market. Finally, the contract manufacturing market itself is very fragmented. There are hundreds of CMOs across the globe, and they are also undergoing consolidation of sorts, which is key to improving their profitability. The total global pharmaceutical contract manufacturing organization, or CMO market, is expected to increase from $72 billion to approximately $110 billion by 2020. That's since late 2015, December of 2015, and that's an annual growth rate of over 8% annually. The global biosimilars market will be contributing greatly to that growth and is expected to reach $30 billion by 2020. That growth represents over 60% compounded annual growth over the past 5 years up to 2020. The biologics contract manufacturing market is relatively underdeveloped as compared to the similar market that services small molecules. But it's going to grow rapidly to $60 billion. And that's going to happen as these manufacturers can address the complex manufacturing processes and also obtain the high skill sets required to get that work done, which is really different than, again, the small molecule manufacturing market. And within this market, mammalian cell culture is also relatively underdeveloped, but represents a significant opportunity to grow to $10 billion by 2020. Now, the smallest market of the four that I've depicted here that makes up the total is the assay development and bioanalytical market. And while the activities right now are relatively lower than the other three, they represent a huge scope for future growth to $10 billion as contract research organizations, CROs, emerge and build more entrenched relationships with the pharma companies. The global active pharmaceutical ingredients and intermediates contract manufacturing market is depicted here at the bottom of this business driver or foundation of the triangle for this market growth business drivers. And it's expected to increase from $56 billion in 2015 to over $80 billion in 2020. And that's an annual growth rate of over 8%. On top of that, the finished dose formulation contract manufacturing market is expected to increase from $16 billion to $25 billion by 2020, again over that 5-year span. And that's an annual growth rate of over 9%. With all of this demand and the capital-intensive nature of the business that comes along with it, and that's the manufacturing requirements, again, the high skill sets that are required. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are seeing the advantages in contracting with contract research organizations or contract development and manufacturing, CDMO, organizations for both clinical and commercial stage analytical work as well as manufacturing. In addition, the pharmaceutical companies prefer then to focus on core areas of their competencies and want to allocate their resources, expertise, and technologies in new proprietary medicines. And I'll get to some more of those details when I talk about the model later. The contract research organizations and contract development and manufacturing organizations are striving to provide a greater value proposition to clients by engaging in the early life cycle stage of projects, and establishing long-term relationships. And finally, the contract research organizations, contract development and manufacturing organizations, and contract manufacturing organizations are consolidating as a means to improve profitability in this really crowded market. Through these consolidations, large organizations have the opportunity to expand their geographic presence and penetrate niche markets, whereas the smaller companies can leverage the technical expertise and especially the resources of larger contract manufacturing organizations. Some of the medical and technical drivers for this growth are the focus on new and complex disease areas. The globalization is one of the new trends in disease control in terms of response, tends to be global these days. There's still a lot of growth in emerging markets. The pharma patent cliff has been in existence now for a number of years and will continue to be there in the future. And finally, the refinement of the contract market is happening in that the contract research organizations and the contract manufacturing organizations, the two kind of standard bearers of the markets, are refining themselves into contract development and manufacturing organizations. And this allows them to have a one-stop shop type of experience for their partners, and they can then integrate themselves earlier into the value chain of the pharma companies. The 5 primary market segments for CDMOs correspond with applied research, non-clinical research, clinical research, CMC, and other. The other segment includes a really wide variety of services from small independent companies with offerings such as consultancies, business development, and IT services, whereas larger companies contribute to this segment in areas such as supply chain management, distribution, and very, very importantly, the hiring and staffing services that are becoming a much more important part of this process. And as you can see, distributed across all of these segments, whether it be the main categories or the subcategories, are various aspects of what has brought us to the WCVP conference this week. This is a depiction of the biologics analytical services market in the United States. The data is a couple of years old, and I'm not necessarily going to go through all of the sub-segments of this market. We are certainly have far surpassed the $500 million size of this market a couple of years ago. But what I really wanted to talk about or stress here are the underlying factors behind the growth very specifically of this market, because it's impacting all of us in the room. Those things are that small molecule companies are moving into biologics with limited expertise. As we heard at some of the talks yesterday, the regulatory requirements around all of these types of analytical services are evolving. Everybody wants to get to the clinic faster, so those shorter timelines are resulting in additional and broader testing earlier in development, also increasing the size of this market. And finally, new capital-intensive specialized technologies is enabling that earlier and broader testing in a much more efficient manner than we would have dreamt possible many years ago. And finally, even though it's not distinguished on this chart, Bioassay is the #1 most outsourced service by biomanufacturers currently in the United States, and it is also the #1 in expected growth. Now, I think I've made it a good case for showing that both biopharma and the outsourcing markets are growing. The growth is constant, and the change is going to pretty much impact everybody in this room, and I think in a very positive way. The question becomes, how will you enter into a new relationship with a contract research or contract development and manufacturing or contract manufacturing organization? Up to now, most of the time, outsourcing business drivers are or have been reactive, functional, or financial in nature. And I'll give you a few examples. A merger might drive the installation of a new sourcing model, which is generally reactive in nature. A small company may not have the GLP or GMP laboratories for supporting clinical trials, drug stability, or manufacturing as their molecule moves through the pipeline. So they have functional reasons then for outsourcing to somebody that does. And the driver might be financial in that a mid-sized company might see outsourcing as the only way of competing financially with larger competitors. The bottom line to all of these is there's nothing wrong with any of these approaches. Everybody is just trying to run a successful business and maintain profitability. On the other hand, when two or more parties start going through a candid, transparent, and well thought out process, a strategic partnership may develop that fully integrates internal and external human and capital resources. Now I'm going to describe a model for developing an outsourcing strategy that I know works at the operational level. Last year, I met Brian Fahey and Evan Guggenheim at Biogen. They introduced their resourcing strategy model, published the year before in Scientific Computing, and successfully implemented it in their technical development team. I strongly suggest looking up and reading their white paper and consider liking it on social media so word spreads across the Biologics analytical community about this thought process. And now I'm going to step through the model before describing how it really structured our initial conversations. This is the model that Brian and Evan developed to outline a strategy to add value for their customers and their shareholders. Note that they define all of the work in their technical development department as important, and I'm going to get to a little bit more details around that momentarily. Brian and Evan have already promoted the model's use across their company's functions from R&D to manufacturing. And this helps ensure alignment as work streams cross different departments. As you can see from the diagram, the model has 4 quadrants that I will walk through. But first, for our purposes, I want to describe strategic work as having 2 basic categories. First, there is proprietary work that usually dominates material generation within a company. And a couple of examples of that are the manufacturing process itself, or it might be the way that data is analyzed in terms of the application to the generation of that material. It's the information that you really want to hold close to the vest and not discuss or disclose with others. The other type of strategic work is proximal work. And this is the type of work that is beneficial to having close to the business. Say something that you want to have nearby an R&D team. And that might have been, for example, Brian and Evan's technical development team. So for analytical functions, this type of proximal work is dominant in terms of a strategy, and it usually applies because speed is important. I want to cover one additional definition. Webster's defines routine as habitual or mechanical performance of an established procedure. And I would like to urge us to avoid this term, because generally outsourcing decisions have traditionally been made to outsource routine work. And within an organization, people whose work is described as routine think they may be doing less important or less valuable work. And by natural extension, the organization, the corporate organization, may be less willing to invest in supporting work that is perceived as less important or less valuable. So one of the first things I'd like to suggest today is that neither the innovators nor their partners perform less important or less valuable work. Now let me use the model to explain. Biogen's efforts should be focused on important and critical work. And the model defines two types of important work: important and urgent on the right side, and important and non-urgent on the left side. Urgent goes hand in hand with strategic, pretty much as if somebody was waiting for something. It could be something coming off a production line, or it might be a data set, for example. So look at quadrant 1 in the upper right-hand corner. Important and urgent work should be performed internally. And the strategic advantages to that are the facts that it might be an emerging technology that is being utilized. There might be novel applications of existing technologies. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, proximity may be a requirement. And finally, turnaround time, that time limitation might be limiting. So that's where Brian and Evan are going to keep work internalized. But what happens when their internal resources become limited? Doing some of this work with a contract research organization, but with a full-time equivalent or FTE team situation might be their next best option. And there's two reasons for that. First is that employing this strategy limits the number of people that would be working on the project. And also, the team's priorities can be adjusted very quickly by Evan or Brian. For example, if they need to stay aligned with a manufacturing function or the timing of some process development functions. So there's lots of capacity management and prioritization involved with this type of work. And it was described as Brian and Evan in the model as being non-predictable. So the combination of the prioritization that might be, or reprioritization that might be happening, along with the capacity management, makes the work non-predictable but important. Also, on the important and non-urgent left side of the model is predictable work. And think of predictable work as work that is governed by a validated method and a protocol. So there's assurance for Brian and Evan that their work will produce meaningful results because it's emanating from a reliable process, the method. The protocol then regulates how much and when work is executed, and also when it is due. What are the due dates? So this is very predictable work. It's important work, but it's not urgent work, and it's certainly not routine work. Lastly, in quadrant 4, Brian and Evan defined and described niche work. It is their work that is important, but usually not strategic. And I think it is this type of work that is generally governed by regulatory agencies such as extractables and leachables or trace metals analysis, where a contract research organization can deploy very specific skill sets and then combine the needs of multiple innovators to support a permanent team. Those people that have very specialized skill sets with a advanced level of instrumentation, again, using extractables and leachables or trace metals analysis, and now even bioassay as examples of work that can be described as niche work. So now I would like to show you how we are putting the model to practice. Initially as a team, we first agreed upon what the standard language meant and the definitions that were embedded within the model. We then started working with Brian and Evan and larger teams of subject matter experts on identifying strategic, predictable, non-predictable, and niche work activities across two work streams: antisense oligonucleotides and gene therapy. I quickly learned that you're really never all in terms of any particular quadrant, and that the 80-20 rule was applied fairly liberally. And as we started driving conversations, those conversations led to a starting potential ASO workstream collaboration. In the model above, Biogen actively prioritizes the work internally and externally. Flexibility and prioritization drove the discussion about the ASOs. The thing that allowed us to move this important and urgent work into a program that might be benefited by an FTE type of resourcing model was site proximity. And it just so happens that the Catalent laboratory team that would perform the work is only a couple of miles from the manufacturing plant of Biogen's. So this is a reflection on that 80-20 rule. Over the following months, we have advanced the conversations, and circumstances change along the way. So we started talking about an additional work stream, and that was proteins and peptides. And this thought process really had not been previously explored very much by Biogen, but we started to think that this non-strategic work might be ideal for Biogen to outsource. It was a more mature work stream within their organization. And that led us then finally to think about this situation where their gene therapy work, their newest work, would likely be performed and driven mostly by their internal teams. Not to say that they wouldn't outsource some of their gene therapy work, but the strategic advantage for them at this point is to be holding that type of work closer to the chest than the proteins and peptides work and the antisense oligonucleotide work. So all of these thought processes have been discussed over the past number of months, and at this point, we think this is what may be the potential best options in terms of a partnership. Now, along the way, and I would say 8 months later, we have, between the teams, identified many positive impacts. And these are not in any particular order, but we really found a lot of instances where instrumentation alignment, along with co-collaboration with the instrument vendors might be really, really instrumental in moving things more rapidly through work streams. Very importantly, automation became an early focal point of our discussions. We already share common platforms, so we can plan on manual method transfers, manual to automated development projects, and pretty much full-on automated to automated method transfers. We are discussing data transfer platforms and planned collaborations with data analysis vendors around common challenges. Turnaround times will definitely be shortened for everything from business agreements to wet work starts. And finally, we are starting a journal. Brian suggested this a couple of months ago, so that we document this interaction, this relationship, the story, so that we could potentially update everybody with a follow-on white paper. So from the perspective of a contract research organization, a contract development and manufacturing organization, or contract manufacturing organization, we have situations where the innovator will maintain proprietary work internally. There's also situations where when they run out of internal bandwidth, that a FTE type of program that offers flexibility to respond to changing priorities is the strategic answer. When it comes to protocol-driven work that a fee-for-service team can work through in a non-urgent method, that platform is there as well in terms of an outsourcing strategy. And finally, I think that contract research organizations have a current advantage in that they can hire really smart people and bring on the most advanced equipment to form and sustain specialized teams for niche work that need to be addressed day in and day out, and those capabilities can be spread across multiple innovator partnerships. So to summarize, our businesses are growing and at the same time consolidating. I strongly believe we are all in the right place at a very exciting time. Outsourcing this type of work will continue to happen, and changes will continue to happen. There'll be more evolution there, but outsourcing is becoming more about strategic partnerships and less about transactional agreements. And nothing about this work is easy or routine. As Brian pointed out to me a couple of months back, that as a contract development and manufacturing organization, we can hire the same really bright people and deploy the same advanced instrumentation as he can. So why not take advantage of an ever-growing partnership? And finally, these relationships take time. They don't always necessarily go in their intended direction, as we have learned over the past 8 months together. But the relationships do develop and things work out. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the team that is making more science possible, and thank you for your attention and participation. You still awake?
I'm still there. That's excellent. I had the hardest time with this topic, getting people to talk strategically like this and to tell me exactly what they're doing, or how they're doing it. So this is kind of mind-boggling in a way. I like the fact that you got some good data in there for the market. That's really hard for us to do.
And
so,
do you want me to keep Do you want me to keep recording for
no,
Q&A?
no.
Or,
you can stop recording now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.